shall we dive into it? I think this is a game that so much is over. Well, so much about it was really about that long injury list that Bayern Munich had, right? And we kind of speculated about how Vinay Company is going to answer some of these injury concerns. Some of it was quite obvious, we've seen this backline last week against Augsburg, so nothing new here. Rafael Guerrero comes in for Jamal Musiala, and I think we all speculated what his role was actually going to be, right? You had the take in our main show that maybe Goretzka is going to play number 10, and look, when these lineups are made, sometimes they're bang on, sometimes they're not. Opta is essentially given a piece of paper and then given the task to put these players into the right spaces. So we weren't actually sure if Guerrero was going to really be in that number 10 position. And guess what? He really was. He was in that number 10 role. Interesting choice. Thinking back now about the game and how it all played out, I don't actually think that was the make or break moment for Bayern Munich. I think the make or break moments was different times. I think Rafael Guerrero doesn't make Harry Kane miss that chance in the first half. Rafael Guerrero doesn't have Inter Milan play through this Bayern Munich defense like it didn't exist. And Rafael Guerrero wasn't at fault for that very late goal when I actually thought Inter Milan were going on absolute fumes. So as controversial as this take was, and maybe it didn't create enough chances, I don't think actually ultimately this was the reason why Bayern Munich lost or didn't win, like won or didn't win this game. I think it was other things that had a more decisive factor in this match.
Yeah, it was a game in which Bayern Munich's B team were incapable of beating a very good Inter Milan side. And that's not to make excuses for Bayern, that's not to diminish what Inter Milan did, but I think that's the reality of it. This was a game where you had a number of first team players missing for Bayern, and it showed. Curiously, probably the key players who did play in this game are the ones who stood out as the most ineffective. I think we could spend an hour talking about that defensive display from Bayern Munich, which was just atrocious.
Yeah.
But just for anyone who doesn't really follow Bayern all that often or is keeping tabs on things, we had a central midfielder at right back, a central defender at left back, and a left back in central midfield, or the number 10, as you just said, in Rafael Guerrero. And technically, Eric Dyer is a defensive midfielder, so he was also played at centre back. So we only had one actual player in his position in that Bayern backline, and boy, did it show. I think it's a worrying state of affairs for Bayern Munich when Eric Dyer is your standout defender in a Champions League game and a game of this quality at this point of the season. It was, I think fundamentally to me, it felt like a game where Bayern just simply didn't have the quality to do what they wanted to do in this match. They still had individual quality, they still had chances. Michael Olise was still doing what he can do. Harry Kane had a handful of chances. Kimmich didn't play particularly bad, I guess. But on the whole, it didn't feel like the kind of well-oiled machine that we've seen Bayern look like for most of the season, particularly in the Bundesliga. And against what I think is a very well-drilled Inter Milan side, a very tactically astute Inter Milan side who know when to press, when to sit back, when to be aggressive, when to go kind of classic Italian football and just kind of pile guys into the box. I think they struggled, not to mention they up against two very, very good forward players in Lautaro Martinez and Marcus Thuram. And I thought for the most part, Bayern just couldn't get going because everything came back to that backline. It came back to the fact that they just couldn't leave any of those defenders one-on-one with Thuram or Martinez, even and perhaps especially Kim, who I thought had a truly atrocious game tonight. I was saying in our group, our subscriber chat, he looked like Bambi on ice. I know there's a lot of chat that he's been carrying injuries for much of the season, so you do kind of want to give him the benefit of doubt there. I then question why he's playing in the first place when Company technically has enough players in his team to put out a decent backline without Kane. For example, Stanisic could have slotted in centre back alongside Eric Dyer. Guerrero could have went to left back, blah, 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 blah. I know that's not ideal because, you still want Kim in that team. But if we're talking about Kim here, who's only like 60 or 70% fit, if even that, It comes with huge risks, and I think those risks were laid bare in this game. I thought he was at fault for the first goal. He was nowhere near Marcus Thuram, and he made that run to set up Lautaro Martinez for the goal. And even just the really basic stuff he struggled with all night. He struggled with keeping up with his man. He struggled with intercepting passes. He struggled with even getting on the end of headers. And that just kind of felt like it reverberated throughout the whole team. And at this level, you just can't really do anything if you don't have a decent backline that you can rely on. So, there are other faults in the team. I thought Leroy Sané had a terrible game. I thought Harry Kane was very quiet. He missed a huge chance, which we could also come and talk about. And that midfield of Goretzka and Kimmich just did not, do what they were probably supposed to do. But fundamentally, I think this Bayern defeat came down to the fact that defense was just kind of chasing shadows for the entire match. And Inter Milan had a lot of fun just cutting through them.
Yeah, they did. I think for 60 minutes, and then they really, I think Inter's really struggled. And I think this is where the frustration comes in for a lot of Bayern Munich fans is that, um, in particular after Müller made it 1-1, it actually felt more like Bayern Munich were going to be the team that's going to push and maybe score a second. And then, this absolute defensive collapse, again, right? On such a boy's side. And that's a transfer I think that we have to chat about a little bit. But, I think where the frustration really comes from is that, and I mean, maybe some of it is also by design. We know how Italian teams operate. We know how astute they are and how they can sit back and absorb pressure. And this is a well-coached club. This is a club with really very good players. They are away at the Allianz Arena. Even at 1-1, that's probably a result that Inter Milan would have taken here. And I think that is maybe the other side of it when you say like they were running on fumes. Maybe they were just doing what needed to be done. It was very noticeable how deep they collapsed. We were literally talking about Bayern Munich playing in and around the box for about a half or 30 minutes until Thomas Müller does what Thomas Müller does best. And this is also a thing that I think maybe frustrates some Bayern fans, and maybe that's the difference. But maybe that's why Thomas Müller has won 33 trophies in his career, and Harry Kane has won a grand total of 0. But that's a space where you need to be as a forward.
Mm.
Like he can, it in the decisive moment in that space, out of nowhere, he pops up and he can read it. And I am still of the opinion that his time has come, but he can still do that better than anyone else. Has shown this time and time again throughout his career. There's a reason why he's one of the best scorers in World Cup history, right? Um, and that makes you wonder. You have a €100 million striker up front there who cannot find the space, and then you bring on your 35-year-old who you essentially sent out to pastures just on Saturday, and he is the one who pops up with the goal, and I think there's something to be said about that, as well. You spend big money on strikers so they can find that kind of space and score those kind of goals, not the players that are close to retirement.